Some international news now. Donald Trump has launched a defiant attack on the investigations against him just hours after appearing before a New York judge. In a speech at his Mar-a-Lago residence, the former president again said he had done nothing wrong and that the investigations were Democrat-led attempts to stop him retaking the White House. It followed a Manhattan court appearance where Trump was arraigned on 34 charges related to hush money payments he allegedly paid a porn star ahead of the 2016 election. Nick Harper is outside Trump's home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach in Florida. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Well, listening to him, it's really something that was to be expected. He talks about how innocent he is. He talks about how he did not envision this particular move in the history of the United States. It's a witch hunt, and he's really not holding back. What else has he had to say?
Yeah, no holding back. A blistering attack from the former president. Like you said, though, I mean, everything that we heard from Donald Trump there was expected. Some of them very similar lines lifted from other speeches about this being a witch hunt, a hoax. But he certainly didn't hold back. I think what's interesting to note here is that he was warned by the judge just hours earlier about tamping down some of his rhetoric. The judge warning him about some of those inflammatory remarks he has made over the last few weeks. For example, he suggested there would be death and destruction if he were to be charged. And yet, just a few hours later, here he was at his Mar-a-Lago residence, you can see just behind me, making a speech that didn't exactly run along the lines of what the judge probably had in mind. There was a fiery rhetoric, there was inflammatory statements, and very personal attacks on the people at the centre of this investigation. He attacked the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, and his family. He said that Bragg was a criminal and that he should be prosecuted or that he should resign. He also attacked the judge himself, the very judge who had made that warning to Trump hours earlier about being slightly more steady in his language. He attacked the judge and his wife as well. We saw him call this a persecution, not an investigation. He said the indictment was ridiculous, an insult to the United States, and he said that as a result the country was going to hell. So very fiery language delivered in a more somber tone. It had less of the bluster that we sometimes see from Donald Trump, especially when he's giving campaign rallies. But the point was certainly there, and the attacks were certainly personal.
And listening to some of those who were responding and, with cheers or even some, jeers as he was making his point, known. How did they receive it? What did his supporters have to say about this? Because ultimately, he is trying to get them to see this through his eyes.
Yeah, very much so. He kept using that term "we" that he uses so often and has done throughout his presidency, during the campaigning before it, during the campaign for the re-election, trying to very much draw the voters into his world and he into their world. This is not about Trump versus the Democrats and the justice system. This is Trump plus Trump's voters against the justice system. Basically saying to them, look, if this can happen to me, this could potentially happen to you. You could be hauled up in front of a judge on false charges. Donald Trump very much trying to keep his voters on side, and I think that everything he said in that room last night will play very well with that hardcore base of Trump supporters. You mentioned the cheers, the jeers that we heard when he attacked some of the Democrat officials. There was also laughter as well from his supporters, and that was just inside the room. Outside the room, I was here, there was hundreds of supporters, many more than I've seen throughout the entirety of the last 4 or 5 days that I've been here since that indictment was announced. There has only been really a handful throughout the weekend, a couple of dozen here and there, slightly more in the evenings. Last night there were hundreds, and they were very clear in their resolve that they wanted to be here outside of his residence to show their support for him right off the back of those charges and that courtroom appearance, making it clear that they are still backing him despite the charges he's now facing.
And what comes up next now that, because we know he's not due back in court for some time?
Yeah, it's a little bit of legal wranglings behind the scenes. The prosecutors have to put forward the evidence that they have. It's called a process of discovery. It really is an opportunity for Trump's legal team to look at that evidence, and it gives them an opportunity to work out how they're going to fight this case. So lots of trading of paperwork, really. There'll be some meetings, there'll be some discussions, there'll be some conferences. But for Donald Trump himself, there'll be no in-court appearance until December the 4th. That's a very long way off. And then we're being told that the trial may not happen until the spring, so potentially a year from now. The prosecution is pushing for a start date some point in January. Trump's legal team is saying the spring. Many legal experts are echoing that as well. It is potentially a very long way off. And what's interesting to note about the timing of that, at the start of February begins the Iowa caucus in the state of Iowa, which kicks off the whole primary season. And that's when every single one of the 50 states gets an opportunity to say which Republican candidate they want at the top of the ticket to fight the Democrats for the 2024 presidential election. So Donald Trump would want to use that time in February, March, April to be out on the campaign trail, hitting all of the 50 states, speaking with voters, but that is unlikely to happen. He will probably be instead in a Manhattan courtroom defending himself on these charges.
How have the Republicans received this particular, development? Because we're seeing some of them talk about the switch hunt, almost echoing what he's had to say. So looking at the fact that he's now been in court, have they spoken out?
Yeah, it's interesting to note they really rallied around him on Thursday evening US time when this indictment was announced, jumping to his defense, including Florida the state where I am, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, he's considered to be a potential candidate who may run for the election next year. He hasn't announced his candidacy yet, but if he does run, he is expected to be really the biggest challenger to Donald Trump for the Republican Party's nomination. He fought very strongly in Donald Trump's defense on Thursday night, even saying that he would stop the process, the extradition process, he called it, of handing over Donald Trump to the authorities in New York. They have been a little quieter on social media and in the press since the actual court appearance, and one notable absence in terms of support for Donald Trump is Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader. Now, he really hasn't said very much at all, and there is some thinking about what the calculation is there for McConnell. He would normally, in the past at least, have backed Donald Trump, but has remained, it would appear, largely quite silent off the back of this court appearance.
All right, Nick, an interesting one. Let's see then what happens. Is he able to go on the campaign trail, or will he be in a courtroom defending himself, as you say? An interesting one to watch. Thank you for that. That's Nick Harper coming to us live from Florida, just right near the Mar-a-Lago residence of former U.S. President Donald Trump.